Welcome to Show Studio. It's Paris Fashion Week and it's our last panel of the season, and a very exciting panel because it's our student panel, which is always my favourite panel when a group of young people come together and look incredibly nervous to give their opinion about contemporary fashion. This season we're going to be talking about Comme de Garçons. In the past we've done panels about student panels about all different shows. We've done like Moschino, Vetements. Comme's an interesting one because I feel like Comme is something that anyone who's interested in fashion really loves, but I was interested to see if that was the case. It certainly was for my generation when we were studying at art school. But before we kind of jump into our discussions, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Starting here.
I'm Florrie Harding. I'm studying at Saint Martins and I'm doing fashion journalism.
I'm Alice Carey. I'm also studying fashion journalism at St Martins, and I'm currently assisting stylist Ib Kamara.
I'm Connor Ives. I'm also at Central St Martins, and I am a womenswear student, first year.
And I'm Veronica, and I'm Bulgarian, and I'm doing an MA in Fashion Media Practice and Criticism at London College of Fashion.
Hello, I'm Ryan. I study Fashion Communication Promotion at Central St Martins.
I'm Glenn Wigham. I'm from Durham, and I'm studying fashion design at Westminster University.
See, the worst bit's over now. That was good. Well done. No one really messed up, so well done. Okay, so first question, I'm just interested, it's like a really interesting time in fashion at the moment. I'm sure you'll all have sort of noticed this if you've been following the kind of reportage around the shows. But there's a lot of discussion about sort of the system crashing or the system changing, and shows, it's a fascinating season because we're seeing sort of different houses showing different seasons, but at the same time, it's men's and women's together, see now, buy now. Some people aren't doing that. What do you guys make, as people who are about to kind of enter into the system, what do you make of all of those conversations? Someone has to go first.
I don't know about you guys, but I think as students, there's not much atmosphere with the shows, or there's not much after a show, people won't, with my circle of friends, won't be really talking about it. And I think there is I wish there was a bit more of a mystery to the fashion show, or something about getting a ticket was you really wanted to work hard to get into that show, whereas I don't feel there's as much buzz around the shows. And I think with the system being so overwhelming over the past couple of years, especially with social media and the coverage just blowing up everywhere, you can see a show instantly. It's in some ways maybe it's just me being pessimistic, but I feel it doesn't really excite me as much. But I don't know, what do you guys?
I completely agree. I mean, I even think in the things that we've seen this season, it's much more heavily affected by sort of this, it's sort of a overused word now, but fast fashion, the Dior show yesterday, it just sort of feels like it's becoming this type of
It's like a factory, isn't it? It's all just churning it out.
Yeah.
Very marketable, very easy things to sell, It's
Nothing's exclusive anymore. You can see it as it happens and you see it afterwards, and I don't feel like I get that excited by it because it's just everywhere.
So what do you guys get excited about? Because there's a lot of focus on trying to do these, this sense of limited edition stuff that feels more exclusive. I was thinking about why everyone's got obsessed with buying old books that are hard to access, or that kind of thing. Or even brands doing quite beautiful sort of little publications or little, limited edition objects or what have you. Is that the kind of stuff that feels more interesting to you? These unusual partnerships, or what is it you guys are interested?
It's funny because in time and stuff, fashion's always been about the catwalks and the designer, whereas now it's so open to everybody. And you've got all these different interns running about and all these people doing different things. It is more accessible, but it sort of dilutes fashion in a way because it's sort of, rather than being exclusive and inaccessible, it's got easier for everybody to get into it now, but that sort of loses some of the magic,
So you don't like the democratization then?
I feel that even having those exclusive items even just feeds into that idea of, I don't know, it's still dictated by social media. So if people's posting something about having this amazing item, it's still dictated by that, because it is still someone being oh, here's my exclusive item, but that's still
but it's two sides of the same coin. It's good more people can access fashion now, but is that actually a good thing or not? Personally, I think it is.
You do
because,
think it is?
Yeah, especially for everybody, because if kids who are 10 years old can get an interest in fashion and simply look on the phone and look at it, it's great for them. Whereas 20 years ago, you couldn't do that, you know?
I think what's really exciting nowadays, at least from my point of view, is the rejection of fashion and how people completely stop looking at shows anymore. Because I don't look at shows, I cannot keep up with everything that's going on, and I don't really think I necessarily have to. And I mean, what are the alternatives? That's the question.
So how do you educate yourself about fashion if you're not looking at the shows?
I mean, I only have just specific ones I look at, and then I don't really have to go on style.com or whatever. I just have to open my Instagram, and there it is, all there. I mean, you don't really have to make an effort.
In this day and age, no, it's
Yeah,
like
there's no effort, is there?
But I don't necessarily think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think it's like going back, I don't know, 10 years ago, I think it's nice that people would have that interest and go into it and look at it in depth, whereas I feel like we're just so disposable. We'll see it on Instagram and it's like, okay, that's done, like we've seen that before.
Do you guys get excited about things like fashion exhibitions or
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So or performances or that kind of thing. Like there's a lot of designers doing interesting things with like costumes for operas
Well, that's
or
the thing, because
ballets
even when you do your research on our course and stuff, Versace, don't just look at shows and things, look at books, look at films, go to museums and actually look at everything.
Well, that's interesting.
I think once fashion gets a bit more interactive, this is when it really gets interesting from a personal point of view.
Okay.
You know, how do you experience fashion and what is fashion? I think this question is.
So what attracted you all to fashion then? Because I get the sense of a slight kind of frustration or mixed with a kind of apathy.
Oh,
but
it's
why do you all want to
inevitable.
work in fashion?
I think, like, well, just fashion is one of those things which is just endless. So when you get into it, it's just endless consumerism of just things that are beautiful, that are so in contrast to reality, which is so. It's like the best part of like the industry, but also it can be a bit of a thing because you can just always just consume just fashion and not anything else because it gives you so much pleasure. But
I love fashion. I love it, you know, and it's like it's one of those funny things, you know, because it's you sort of have these realizations where you're like, you know, what am I doing? You know, why am I? You know, it's at the end of the day, it's just clothing, you know, and it's sort of like, I think that makes it even more special, you know, because it's you don't have to sort of like romanticize the idea of it, but it's like it still is something that's there and has been there, you know, since the beginning of time, you know, like us putting clothes on our bodies, you know, like that is fashion. So you don't have to look at it in this sort of like nuanced, you know, like elitist way. Like I think, you know, because everything that's being brought up, you know, it's like there's a good side of it and there's a bad side of it. You know, I think the accessibility of fashion is so important, you know, because it's brought on, you know, a whole new era, and it's one of those things where it's like we can't, it's just sort of where our times have gone, that it's sort of like, I think it's even more interesting now for like people that do have a problem, like maybe with, you know, the speed of it or whatever, to react against that, you know, and that's sort of what is happening now. You
So
know,
it's
and
more
like,
the organisation and the timings and the pace that you guys find frustrating, but the actual concept of fashion is something
Yeah.
that's not
When you study fashion, it's lovely because
Yeah.
it's an art form in itself, but it's also a craft.
Yeah.
So you can learn how to sew and you can learn how to pattern cut, but you can do it in a way that makes it unique to you.
Yeah.
Whereas like I could have done art, but art's so free and so there's no sort of rules to it. Whereas fashion does have rules and has historical rules, but you can bend it towards your own thing.
Yeah, okay.
And in that way, you can end up with a finished product that's what
It's like applied art. then.
Yeah, it's got those connotations like from the past to it as well, and it's got identifiable as fashion clothes, but it's also an art form in itself.
and it's
why I
such
do
a
it.
powerful tool
Yeah.
of communication because we all wear clothes and they have like, especially with designer clothes, like just by, it could be just a black jacket, but it's been constructed in quite a specific way, considering by the designer's taste, and that can be because you really live in it and you participate in.
Well, just look
its
at the white
creation.
T-shirt.
It's
You can just put a slogan on that, and straight away you'll get attention from it.
Yeah.
You could write like stuff for Tories on it, and people will look at it and,
and
be
it's
like,
a
"Whoa!"
special
You know?
experience of like actually wearing it with either pride or confidence.
Do you
or
all tie fashion a lot to your identities? Because there's all this talk about your generation, I think particularly because of this like gender fluidity thing that's become such a thing in fashion at the moment, but talk of like, you know, how young people are so much freer with their clothing and they use it to express themselves, blah, 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 blah. Do you look at that quite cynically, or do you think that is the case?
Not at all.
Yeah.
No.
No.
I think
mean,
it's
it's
lovely when you
great,
see
I
someone
mean-
and they're walking down the street and they look great and they're wearing what they want to wear.
Yeah.
And you can tell they've picked that because they feel happy in it and they look nice in it,
Yeah.
you know?
So it's
a
almost
good-
a form of
yeah.
performance in a way.
Yeah, so you're putting on a mask every day.
Yeah.
well, and also that comment, you know, of sort of like older generations critiquing a younger generation for, you know, how they look or how they dress, you know, again, is like an age-old thing, you know. It's like, I think it's amazing because it just shows that, like, you know, as like generations go on, you know, we're moving towards like, you know, a sort of better version of what it was, you know. And like the same thing, you know, of like what people said in like the 60s and the 70s of like the way that like teenagers were dressing, you know, in this time of like upheaval, you know, this and that, like it was very telling of the times, you know. So I think in the same way that fashion now is very sort of telling of our time, you know, and like what we're sort of coming up in now.
I think it's been much more extreme in the past anyway, you know, like you were saying, the 1970s with punk and things like that. It has been much more hostile and the whole attitude. So actually now, even as students, and even though we do feel things towards fashion, that it's been, you know, it's been more aggressive in the past. And I think that's how it needs to be with, you know, things like political turmoil. There needs to be more reaction. There's not so much reaction anymore, and I feel like that
and not just
needs to happen.
this whole culture on social media of posting your political thoughts, which is I think really good to encourage people to do that, but there's so much more that you can do rather than just...
But still, I don't think there's any better way to have a political opinion than wear a t-shirt with something on. But it's funny because in the past and stuff with all the subcultures, they were powerful groups of people where people noticed it and people were quite terrified of subcultures. And I sometimes feel in the 21st century that subcultures like that have died out completely. And people just sort of recycle the subcultures and wear stuff part like I do it, you know.
I think that's the reason that
we're very nostalgic to the past, and I feel like it's a great time right now because I feel like we as youth can do something, and I'm like surprised that nothing.
Do you think part of that is the fact you all communicate so digitally, because you're talking about past subcultures, but often that was very much tied to the physical space. You know, it could be the city.
People didn't have the money or the means to look at other things and think, oh, I can wear that dress, but with those boots. People didn't have that, you know.
It's potentially more disconnected now.
It's like you're more connected than ever, but you're not. There's not that same kind
physical,
of that's
there's an absence of community, I think, with subcultures now, where people just can dress what they want and wear what they want. Whereas back then you couldn't, you know. But it's not a bad thing though, because you can walk around today and still look like be a jumble of different styles and things, and still have your own sort of image with it, and that could be something new, and that's not a bad thing at all, you know.
But do you feel like fashion is? Do you feel like the students, like your peers, yourselves, the courses you're on, do you feel like people see fashion as something that can be political and should be political?
Definitely. With the graduate shows as well, it can be seen. I mean, Philip Ellis, the Saint Martins graduate BA, he did the whole collection on Brexit, and you know there is a voice there, but I think it needs to be much more in protest. You know, not a classic catwalk show, just more.
But you find that in every course, because there's always a group of people on the course who have opinions and have something to say, and then you get other people who don't, and just sort of want to make clothes. And, you know,
I just really think nice it's extremely important to have your own position. So if you've chosen fashion to be your tool of communication, how do you make the most of it?
Exactly. It's so personal too. You know, fashion is so personal. You know, it's something that, you know, you get up and you dress, you know, the way that you dress because that is you. You know, and like, I think if when you get up in the morning you have a political message, then you should completely, you know, sort of like dress in that way. But then I think also if you're not, you know, if you're not contributing anything, you know, like that's fine as well, you know, because that's maybe you're not a political person, you know. It's sort of like it's so personal, you know, that I think people can just sort of do what they want with it, which I think is kind of nice about it.
And I think like that's why I think a lot of us get quite excited by the fashion exhibition, because it's a free space where all walks of life can come and absorb and spend a long period of time digesting what's being put in front of them, whereas we're so used to everything being so fast that if you can just walk into a beautifully created space that's just highlighting the best of a certain designer, I think that's a really beautiful thing to do, and especially broadening fashion to other industries and get the discussion talking about maybe somebody from a completely different walk of life can be intrigued by it, and I think it's actually interesting for our industry as well, to learn from people who have nothing to do with it. So,
tell me, which brands and labels and designers, because I'm conscious I want to talk to you about Comme, but I want to just do a kind of straw poll first, like what which labels are you guys particularly excited about, or which designers?
Margiela, I think. Yeah. He just keeps innovating. He's a bit like Ray on that sense. Like, he'll continue, and he's just got the most amazing legacy. And like the Margiela show the other day, I just think he's just doing great things, and I think he'll continue to do it like Ray is.
It feels authentic as well, because you know it is Galliano, and you know that it is him.
I'm glad he's back, seriously.
You can see it.
Because his stuff in the 80s was fantastic, you know. And you see him back again, enjoying himself, and really, it's more focused this time, I feel, his stuff, because the stuff in the past was so over the top and so glamorous, whereas stuff now is so focused on sort of line.
Well,
it's nice.
I think the aesthetic also is so much more fitting. You know, like when I was a kid, I was never a fan of Galliano's Dior. You know, like I would look at sort of like fashion magazines, but it never sort of appealed to me. And I like got to London, you know, and everyone was like, you know, like crazy about Galliano, and obviously, you know, and it was sort of one of these things where it was actually so nice when he came back to Margiela, because it was like I sort of completely like rediscovered that, you know, and it's like something you almost sort of like overlooked as a kid to then like find, you know, 10 years later, and then like sort of like fall in love with all over again, you know, like even like the earlier collections, you know, at like that he did at his own label, not even at Dior, you know, where it was sort of like the everything was sort of reconstituted and recycled, you know, and like there was so much going on there, you know, and it was just like a feast for the eyes, you know, and it's like, it's so nice to have something like that, because I think it fits a lot better with the Margiela, you know, label or aesthetic.
Is it the stories that you like? Because obviously his collections are so full of narrative, or is it just the piece? Is it a mixture of all of it?
I think it's a mixture of all of it, but even, I mean, just the craft of it all. You know, you would look at the dresses, you know, like from sort of his earliest collections, you know, and they were so exquisitely cut, you know, and just like the way that they fell and stuff, and it was like, that's such a nuanced thing, you know, that's only, someone will only understand that if they have like sort of, you know, a mastery in fashion, you know, as he does, you know, and it's just sort of, it was just amazing, you know, to see that at play.
I think the narrative is also very important, because I think there's lots of designers that don't form strong narratives, like you see lots of, I don't know, people like Celine, and it's all very repetitive and it's all very wearable. His work is very wearable pieces, but he's very good at like,
See, I always think a collection's better when it has a narrative. You know? It's more fun as well. Because when a collection doesn't look like it's got any story tying it together, it's like it's lost. Whereas when it, you know,
like certain designers are very, like, for me it's always been Miuccia Prada, because I think she just, especially in this day and age, in terms of how she references her collections, like, I love how when you look at the collection, it's quite complex over what she's been looking at. Or I'm like so intrigued to like pick her brain over like what she was thinking. Because also the fact how she decodes the 60s, I think like in a lot of her collections she always goes back to shapes or proportions or prints that are quite synonymous with the 1960s. But she really like dissects and reinterprets rather than just taking the highlights from that decade and then just
she's very good at referencing herself, and I think that adds to the complexity of the references, because she'll reference something she did maybe 10 years ago, which obviously reference lots of different things, so you get these layers of references, which I think I have this obsession with designers who reference themselves. I think it's fascinating, because then it becomes such a mix of things. It's interesting, none of you mentioned London design. Are you like, you know, your J.W. Anderson, your Charles Jeffrey?
I was just going to say Jonathan Anderson, even for the same reasons of what we were saying with Miuccia. You know, the references are always so obscure, you know, and then even when it's sort of like picked apart and stuff, you know, it becomes this thing of like, well, I was looking at the, you know, it's like his press releases never really like make too much sense, you know, when you read them and stuff, but it's such an idea, you know, and then you sort of look at the clothes and you're like, you know, I see that, and it's like, I think that's what's so amazing about, you know, 2016, you know, like we've sort of reached this age where there's no, you know, sort of like defining, you know, sort of trends anymore, you know, and these designers are sort of, you know, become like so good at just sort of like collaging things together.
So you don't mind that? You don't mind the whole sort of designer as creative director or curator rather than designer as designer?
Well,
I think it's fine.
You know?
But there's a limit to it. Like, for example, Charles Jeffrey does the club nights and things, and that's great. But I think one of the problems with the catwalks and things is when designers sort of the focus isn't on the clothes and the focus is on other things, it can actually let the clothes down a bit, for example.
I also have a thing of like, I feel like a lot of London designers are almost fantastic stylists, but in terms of like the construction of the garment, I'm a person who's really seduced by tailoring. So if it's like a superbly tailored like black coat,
But I think it all depends on what the designer wants to sort of say.
Yeah, it's true, but I think, I don't know, there's a slight disconnection with like there's too much focus on how fabulous it might look on Instagram
I think you
rather
can
than
also
the
come
actual
out.
show experience.
You can come out of a show and feel a little bit deflated because it is all, I don't know, you may have like the greatest atmosphere or
It's the hype of it, isn't it?
but
It's addictive.
I don't know, I've preferred presentations purely because you get that, you can become up close with the clothing and see all the like finer details, whereas with a show it's just like, you know, they just come out and then it's done and then you're kind of like
There's less to hide behind in a presentation, I think.
Yeah.
Shows can be very like,
Yeah, they're quite deceptive, I
Gaudy.
suppose, because there is a stylist who's helping to look on the clothes to look great, and there are all these makeup artists, all these models, but then at the end of the day, when you see the clothes on a row, it just feels very disappointing.
But I think like somebody to look up to is definitely Alexander McQueen in that perspective, like marrying such fantastic showmanship, but then also just superb tailoring that isn't. When you actually look at the garments, they're pretty regular. They're not, especially from I guess like the 90s, which I think is just a fantastic marriage for the two.
who do you guys really not like? Who's overrated?
I think Fashion East is slightly, I don't know, like
It's getting hipstery. Yeah.
there's a problem with
Just to say it.
there's a bit of celebrity, like there's a celebrity culture of like this thing about identity and presenting it so
When you get
much.
like collaborations, like
Top
Rihanna
shot
X this and it's,
Yeah.
do we need that celebrity endorsing the designer?
Yeah.
Because I think when that happens, it sort of makes a designer seem less good as a designer because they're needing the celebrity endorsement, so pull it up.
Yeah.
So I'm not a massive fan of that.
You're not a fan of that. That's interesting.
But I think it is important to be able to support the designers though, and I think they are.
Yeah.
You know, there is definitely an atmosphere there with Fashion East in the way that they really are supporting designers,
true.
and they do. You know, they always bring something different. There's always presentations, sometimes catwalks. So I appreciate that as well in that respect. Anyway.
Who else is
itching.
overrated?
I was really disappointed by Dior.
Dior.
Yes.
Whoa,
We
you
were discussing
didn't
that
like it?
earlier,
Okay,
yeah.
that's interesting. I actually didn't mind Dior, but you like, why didn't you like it?
Oh my god, the tape that is like Dior, you know, and it's like I love the sentiment behind it, you know, I love the
I thought it was
message
really
that was being
romantic.
created.
You liked it?
Yeah.
It was Valentino.
Bits of
wasn't
red
it?
and
The
stuff, it was nice.
Two dresses were so.
What did you want for Dior though? Did you like Raf Dior?
Yeah, see that was like
You're like, no, you didn't like it.
I loved him at Jill Santa, so
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it was a
But
bit.
that first like Raf Dior like I talk about it endlessly. Like that was like I thought that was the most amazing thing, you know, and that was like seeing that in like that moment, it was just sort of like I think I must have been like 15 or 16 at the time, and that like did it for me, and I was like, okay, this is, you know, I'm doing this. This is like amazing. Like it was just one of those moments where like it felt so magical, you know, and like I think I had really high hopes, and I think it was like my fault, you know, and like I didn't, you know, but
I think
I'd love to see what she does with it, you know, like
So you just it's just disappointment then. You want something more.
Just
Kind of a poison chalice in that way. Though it's such a hard house to.
But it's funny because when a designer inherits the house, they've got to do everything that comes with it, but have their own imprint on it, and that is tricky.
Yeah, it's very tricky. I think it's such a hard house to
If you
do.
can pull it off, mint. If you can't,
Yeah, John was good at it because he just did whatever he wanted. Like, it was like those shows, like sometimes I wonder how offended the Dior customers were, like especially the couture.
Plus, it takes a lot of confidence, I think, and a lot of balls to like flout the rules
But
like
it's
that
amazing
and just do what you want to do.
Yeah.
There's a really good video on Show Studio of all of John Galliano's bows. You know, he always used to wear fabulous outfits. It's really good. Yeah, it's very funny.
in like the space.
The space suit,
Yeah.
I was about to say that.
It's very, very good.
Amazing.
So what do you guys think of Comme des Garçons and Rei Kawakubo's work?
I think as a fashion student, it's one of the brands you have to know about it, because if you don't, you just have to, you know. I haven't met a fashion student who doesn't know who Rei Kawakubo is.
Yeah.
You have to know who she
But
is.
you want to know about it because it's constantly like I don't know, it's just amazing. And she constantly innovates, like season after season. It's always something completely different.
You never get the same thing, and
It never
you sit there looking at it, and it's like, how can this be real? How has she made this stand out that far? And it's
I think it's the balance as well. Like we have Dover Street Market, which is a great institution, and you go there and you absorb this inspiration and the space itself. And she's just marvelous. I mean, everyone is amazed by this woman, but at the same time, they sell these Comme the Garcons Converse sneakers. So how do you fund?
So is it the balance of that? It's really accessible in some way.
That's what I like about it.
Because everyone wants to be connected.
If
to
you're
Comme
too
the Garcons
mad and crazy, you're not going to sell anything.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're too commercial, people will say you're boring. And she manages
She's
it.
really
It's kind
done
of
it
two
already.
different sides. Like, I guess because she has, you know, her partner Adrian Joff, who does kind of Dover Street, so he can be the public. Like, 'cause she's like, you know, so rare to read interviews with her. Like, so rare to. I remember like I met her in Paris and she was in the street with Adrian, and I saw Adrian and I was like, hey, and then he was like, hey, and then I realised she was standing next to him, and I was so like, I didn't really speak. I just made a sound, and I kind of like bowed. I was like, boom. It was awful, but like it was kind of amazing because she was like, she's this kind of. She's so mysterious, but then Comme is everywhere. It's like I think that's what I find fascinating about it, is like how it can in some ways sell out so much by doing like, you know, Converse little wallets.
See, like, I don't think that's a bad thing though,
back.
because she's made such a name for herself. People can buy the Converse as like buying a piece of her. They can take it away with them and like keep it forever in it. I think that's nice.
I think that's nice.
What's so special is people are buying the clothes because the clothes are so amazing. They're not buying it for the person. Because if you look at Moschino and Jeremy Scott, people have become so obsessed with him. He's
So much self-indulgence as well. A lot of
Like, do you remember when Medium
brands
Kershaw closed down and all the shoes got sold and everything like that?
Yeah.
I remember everybody dying to get a pair, to own a bit of like Medium Kershaw, just to say, I've got this.
But then that whole thing comes out then behind it that like, you know,
that is the
clothes
nasty side of fashion when it's
so it's like, you know, and then you always just have to be like so weary with those things. But I think like even with, you know, her sort of purpose and stuff, it's like she doesn't need that spectacle, you know, like she has become an entity, and I think she's a very smart businesswoman, you know, for not like, maybe she doesn't handle, you know, the business side of things, and you know, like she has Adrian for that, but she understands, you know, marketing, and she understands that, you know, like almost sort of like that elusiveness, you know, that sort of like among you know, like among sort of like people that know fashion, creates that sort of, you know, like legendary you know, she's like an entity, you know, she's sort of like not
she's
really,
ethereal.
Yeah, exactly. So
Like,
it's just
she's there, but you can't even touch her.
so it's
Odd.
She's
Also
like
even-
the
Even away from her designs are amazing. It's just all about the design as well. You could literally just look at the clothes and it's just.
And do you like that she's, we were talking about politics before, and I would always say that she's a very political designer, and is that something that you guys also like, that the shows, they confront in some ways, you know, like the men's show is kind of Emperor's New Clothes, kind of, I think,
and there's
is that
such
something you
like subtleties, the way that
it's
she,
subtle,
every season she might attack a political situation or express what's on her mind, but she does it in a way that she doesn't have to write anything or like on a logo.
Feels very natural.
So that's the kind of proof she's a
So
good designer.
refined.
Because the fact she can express all that she feels having to write this on a t-shirt, the fact she can do it through clothes itself is a really good gift. Like, it's very rare you get a designer that can do that to a good degree.
And what I love those, and it's a bit like Miuccia Prada, obviously you were talking about her before, but I really like those designers that they're so intelligent that actually, even if they don't, even if the intention's not there, us, the fashion press, are so like conscious that there must be something really smart behind it. So she could probably do a t-shirt, like just black t-shirts, and would be like, there must be a statement on this. It's kind of interesting that like when you project, like veneer makes it sound cynical, but this veneer of intellectualism that surrounds something like Prada or Comme des Garçons is really, really clever. And I always think Jonathan Anderson has been quite successful at trying to sort of craft one of those around himself as well. And it's a really smart thing to do, because it means then that the clothes take on these added values and meanings. And it's hard to do that, I think, as a designer.
I think she pulls it off because, for example, if you go in an art gallery, there's people sitting around a painting, not sort of, it's awkward, like you're trying to look like you know what the painting's about, and everybody around you looks clueless. And it's happened in fashion now, and you get designers who can do that. So you get the front row and everybody on the phones, Instagram and everything, and then you have the people at the back thinking, actually, I know what this is about. You know, it's that sort of art and fashion hand in hand thing, and she pulls it off.
She pulls it
really
off.
well.
And I think it does speak to lots of different people. I think it's nice that there's something that's such a part of the fashion establishment that young people still find exciting. You know, because if you look at, there are other houses that were so significant. I wouldn't know. Would you guys be particularly excited about like Yoji or something like that? Like, yeah, you would be. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Should we have a look at what she's done for this season? The hair's always really good as well. That's one of my favourite things.
That one's lovely, isn't it?
Which one's your favourite?
The
Big
second one.
Yeah.
The second one, or the third one. The third one's quite good because it looks like she's like a bit turtly, you know. It's like
I was gonna say, I couldn't tell if it's like the fabric is like inflated, you know, if she's like almost sort of holding this up as it's like billowing behind her. It's amazing.
I would love to just see her sat down sketching her ideas.
yeah.
It'd be fantastic to watch her do it.
She goes like, whoops.
I love interviews with her, you know, when she'll answer in like one word. They're so amazing.
But it's just everything about it, like the styling pulls it together.
Yeah.
Because you can have an amazing jacket, but if the hair's not looking good, it's going to look a bit
Julian
crap.
Ducey does the hair does such a good job because it's always such a compliment to the. And I think I always think obviously Somerset House have got that Sam McKnight exhibition opening soon. So I was talking a lot to Sam about doing hair for the runway, and we talked about this idea that, you know, the confidence of designers who are willing to let the hair really be sort of a moment, because it means that you're not worried about your clothing being overshadowed. Yeah. And there's always such a sense of history with the hair. Like often it does reference kind of.
Well, last year when she did the black hair all over the face, that was really
scary.
And nobody's doing that, like really like pushing the boundaries.
I think it takes guts to do it. Yeah.
I think Isamaya French coming in on the makeup has made designers more willing to sort of open up a bit with their beauty looks, and that's been interesting. But you're right, I think with the hair it's very, particularly the women's wear, it's very much like, you know, big blowout. Like.
I just think it's good that she can make that and kind of scare the audience a bit, thinking, whoa, what's that?
Yeah. It doesn't look like a clown or anything.
No.
Because she's not comical at all.
I like the way in number 4 she's done a Vetements tribute with the big shoulders.
I do admit I do miss the kind of teeny like proportions that she used to do in sort of
do
like
you?
90s. Yeah, like I do enjoy how she's kind of embracing this like less, it almost doesn't look like furniture, like clothing, but I think there was something really powerful in the past when it was more actual simpler garments.
Well, she's kind of spoken, I think, about her like boredom is simplistic, but kind of this ennui about fashion, and how she is more making kind of almost objects now and not making clothes. And I think you definitely sense that.
And she still has a Comme des Garçons shirt line, which is a beautiful shirt.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And there's even the one now that's like Comme des Garçons, and I don't know.
There's so many. There's like.
I was gonna say I don't even know if she does it, but it's like again like another beautiful label. You know,
if you go around David Street Market, there's like so many different types of like Comme des Garçons girls.
Jonia was like she took him on board, and like other designers that she's interested. I think that's really special.
It's just inspiring, because if you're a designer, you can get to the stage where you can be making all this money but still have a collection where it's as creative as you want it to be. You have to worry about like the cost of it.
Well, I always think, I have this theory that it's like you have that flexibility when you're either like right at the start of your career and you're a student, or you're like so established, because it's like that point where you can do a runway show where it's completely kind of madcap. It's like once you start kind of having to build a business and you're a young designer, you actually kind of lose all that potential.
It's a fear, because you know if you go on like that, you won't make money.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny because when I started fashion, everyone's like money, it's all about the money. And it is in a way, but it's not. So that's why I'm trying to enjoy the years you got at uni.
Yeah, it's so important when you're at college, because you can do stuff that's, you know, it's the only time where you really don't have to think about
but I think
selling.
Loads of people respect her so much as students because of how much she manages to have such a commercial brand. Like, she's never had to use handbags to like sell her work, but like, I mean, I see everybody wearing those trainers around town. But then still create such beautiful.
Well, it goes back to like the character she's made for herself, where everybody wants a bit of it, like a souvenir.
And it's interesting we were talking about self-referencing, because the tartan and things like that, she is good at also like you know immediately it's Comme des Garçons, and part of that is the hair and like how prolific those flat images have become, and you can look at that and know it's Comme. But
even like the shape, like the sort of tartan one feels reminiscent of like last season when it was like the pink sort of like ruffled giant sleeve, you know, just that sort of like super wide shoulder, you know, and then like this big thing, and it's like it's funny because like it feels reflective of like the times in fashion, you know, everyone doing this like exaggerated shape and stuff, but like her doing it, you know, in her respect, you know, and sort of taking it to like the nth degree, you know, it's like that I think is like.
Well, she
what
does.
makes
She
it so
plays
good.
with flatness in a like
Yeah.
really interesting way, and people always read into that and they're like, oh, it's about the internet and what have you. But I think it is interesting. Her garments take on these odd proportions where they, you know, and particularly at the moment it is that kind of flat, broad thing. But also what I like is it does filter down, like you know, that black, that
You
navy
still want
and
to
white.
wear it.
over-
Like I still,
yeah.
you know, like I find myself looking at these collections, and it's like, you know, you're looking at this, and you're like, oh my god, I want to wear that. You know, and it's like it's not.
But that polka dot, it's like I have a polka dot Comme dress that's exactly, it's like a really simple shift dress, but it's, I think it is that, we were talking about having a piece of something, and that's interesting.
I like how most of them, like in a lot of collections, she always has some of the flat shoes and just like how they move with, there's not, there's quite a lot of confidence with the models with how they don't feel like they're imprisoned in these shapes, they're really living.
Just the shape she makes, it's like she's not, like, it's a reaction to the world around her and what's going on in her mind and everything, and she puts it into practice with the shape she makes. And it's just, it's lovely, because she doesn't care, she goes for
There's
it.
no fear to it.
I think what's amazing about her is she doesn't have any boundaries because she's still got complete control over her company as well. She hasn't, like, she's not restricted by, I don't know, like LVMH or...
She's lucky in that sense, because one thing I got said about a while back was Gareth Pugh, because when he started off, his stuff was amazing. Fantastic shapes, and now he's having to have a partner and stuff. It's sort of, it's still good, but it's, you know, it's not that same sort of wildness.
Really restricts, and she's clever to have, like, she's just done what
Kind of
she
the same as
wants
Rick
to do.
Owens as well. I always think that with Rick Owens because it's so impressive, also because it is independent and it just buys this different kind of flexibility.
Yeah.
I love, one of my favourite things about her is the kind of childish thing that she plays with. You know, her dresses often, and there's a kind of, it's quite subversive as it often does look like, like the oversized Peter Pan collar, and you know, you always think ruffles and frills, but there's something a little bit odd about that because it's this innocence, but mixed with such knowingness.
It's nice because like one of my pet peeves is when people start with like, so we're going for a strong woman, and it's like, there shouldn't be like, that's such a wrong way of like going about it, but with her it's like, that thing of like depicting sort of childhood dresses, and then you would feel powerful enough to go into a business meeting to do it. I think there's a lot of integrity with it.
Plus the way she sort of wraps them up in these shapes gives them more power as well, like laying on top of it. I mean, if you walked down an alley and you saw that coming towards you, you'd be a bit scared. You would.
I also think it's so nice that like she will never play with that like celebrity status that we're seeing. It's so oversaturated. How many times I've seen Kendall Jenner walk down a runway and it's just so boring.
She doesn't need that.
She doesn't need it because the pros don't speak for themselves.
No, which is interesting because whenever I speak to young designers, you talk about the celebrity thing, but sort of off the record, a lot of them will express such distaste for it. But they'll be like, oh, it has to be done, and it's almost like you have to. But there are. It's the same with Rick Owens. There are lots of designers who don't engage with it and have built really viable businesses, and I think it is a good message to send.
I think it's like a sort of secret shame thing. People will say, oh, I don't need celebrity endorsement, then secretly be like, yeah, I want it. You know, but she doesn't need to.
And like also a lot of the collections are not that big as well.
Well, this is only 17, and I love that. I think it's amazing.
It feels more refined and, you know, concise. It's definitely, I mean, you can see a thought that's gone into it as well.
It feels more authentic.
Amazing looks, not scrolling through, I don't know, 60 and I'm
Yeah.
like, that's the same as the one before.
But I also think if an idea is good enough, it doesn't need to be a huge collection. You know, it can be like 2 or 3 outfits. What do we think of the last look number? Sorry, like because I love it when she does like, you know, historical dress and you think, you know, ruffs. I think that's amazing.
It's very like Puritan, like I you know, like I don't know, even like the I think you like the Peter Pan collar before like felt almost sort of like, you know, like a Puritan neck sort of. I love that though, you know, like that's such a lovely reference because it comes from a place like of, you know, the clothing, even sort of what Ryan was talking about before, like that clothing back in the day like carried so much weight because it was made in a certain way, you know, like it was interfaced in a certain way, you know, it was sort of like all of those details were done by hand, that it's like the reference to pull from, you know, is obviously like extraordinary, but then like even like why did we wear, you know, sort of like giant, you know, collars like that, you know, because in 2016 it's sort of, it feels so, you know, like out of place or something, but then it's like, it had a place once in history, you know, it's like people, that was you know, the popular opinion, you know, everyone dressed that way. You know, it wasn't sort of like now where it's like people would be like, no, I'm not dressing in that way. You know, it's like everyone sort of bowed to, you know, the norm.
Yeah,
And
that's
I think
interesting.
fashion used to really was such a tool of like separating the classes in terms of like how, especially I think what's great about 2016 is that there is a lack of like society and what class you are and like pressure.
I still think there's a class divide in fashion though. I still think there is.
But I think fashion is like out of an industry, like a lot of people have come into the industry from all different.
Do you think that's changing, like with you guys at college now, because obviously tuition fees are such a pressure? Do you find the makeup of your classes less?
It is different.
It's not as diverse as it should be, I don't think. Like in my course, there's very few working class people. But in a way, it's not a bad thing, because when you haven't got that much money to spend on something, you think of other ways to spend money and how to like get fabric or do a collection without having to spend a fortune.
There's a lot more thought that goes into things as well.
And I like with Comme, like I think there was a collection from like 1994 where like all the knitwear had been like moth eaten and everything was just not luxurious, and I loved how she presented that to kind of an audience which were
because they went mad when she did that, didn't she? Like, you can't do that.
Her first ever collection was like that, and people were like,
that's not fashion.
Yeah, that's not fashion. It's like
a roche machique.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember John Waters once, like, I don't know whether I read this interview, but he actually wore a Comme des Garçons shirt, and then everyone was like, oh, what's that you're wearing? But it was like actually like $1,000. It's like, okay, I know it for myself that it's Comme des Garçons and it's beautiful. You could think whatever you want.
But it's clever how she can do that. She can make a jumper full of holes and still get a price tag that says £600.
Yeah.
And people will still want it.
But this is different. This kind of collection is different. This is not deconstructed like in any way. This is like completely over-constructed. It's inflated, built up. Like
I think it's a good reaction to the modern world as well, because she's got all these women looking like warriors, all beefed up and angry, and you know, I mean, the world at the minute's not a nice place to be. All the bombings and things, and it's not nice. And she's done this collection where these women are empowered.
But also I think it's also the clothes look quite empowered. Like there's an interesting thing with the clothes. Like you see it there in number 5. The clothes look like they're kind of morphing and growing and like almost like consuming the wearer. Like, and in that one, it's like it's like liquid. It's like coming out of the. And I think there's something.
It's still like a tidiness to it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not overly messy and stuff. Like for example, Craig Green with the wood and stuff.
Yeah.
It has a tidiness and a sort of tailored finish to it.
So we're impressed. We like it.
Yeah, I love it.
I like how there's so much small details that you can like pick out, and at first you don't see it, but these details are beautiful to like really see how it's folded and layered.
But that was expected, wasn't it?
Yeah. I'd like to see how it moves though.
You have to go and try it all on.
But I always like how she has a few things that are just bright colours, you know? She has all the black sort of works, and then bang, you get this bit of red.
Yeah.
The one red look, I love that.
It's quite a good wedding look, isn't it? Like come down the aisle like that.
Because you wouldn't think it would fit into the collection, but it does.
Yeah.
You know?
And she's like, there's been a couple of collections recently where like, I think there's been similar silhouettes, but it's nice that this repetition that doesn't feel old.
I also like that there's repetition. I like that she's in a groove and she's going to continue.
She's really innovative in that respect.
Even what you were saying before of like, you know, designers being able to reference themselves, it's like become sort of like nuanced for her, you know, and that like she can reference herself from season to season, you know, like the past 2-3 seasons, like I can think of in my head from Comme des Garçons have been about, you know, upheaval, you know, sort of like revolution. You know, last season it was like punks and stuff. There was like that show a year ago that was like all red, and she was like, I was inspired by like the, you know, like the idea of war. You know, it's like it's obviously coming from a place that is like when you're stuck on a mentality like that, you know, you don't really like leave that after a season.
The most rebellious thing that you can do in fashion now is not to change. Like the biggest pressure in fashion at the moment is to sort of like revolutionize everything every 6 months, and I actually think part of the
that is risky to do that as well.
It's really risky.
Because the design doesn't change each season. You'll get people criticising that design for not changing.
Yeah, I think that's is exactly what you say. The themes are so important that the fact that there's conviction to continue exploring them. Is it's because she can do what she wants though. She's very cocky.
And we have so much like clothes like today, like so like over consumerism of just so much product. So to see a designer actually challenge that, and I like how it's almost so much. It feels like a good reflection of where we are, like in terms of we can buy, but does that lead to a happy future?
Yeah.
I think so.
I just think she's a perfect inspiration to fashion students everywhere.
Yeah.
Aww.
You know what I mean? 'Cause everybody would like to be in her shoes, having that freedom to be like that, you know?
With such integrity
you
as
want.
well.
Although sometimes I have a few examples in my head that like people are so inspired by her that they lose themselves because they so want to become the Garçons. It's like, whereas...
Yeah. Maybe that's a nice note to end on. She's the perfect example for students. Should we give her a round of applause for a brilliant selection?